Welcome to Module 3, Risk Management. In this module, you will learn the different types of risks, elements of the risk management process, and we'll briefly touch on post-market risks. Note that there will be a quiz at the end of this module. You must score at least an 80% to pass. The quiz can be retaken as many times as needed. Let's start out with some key definitions. A risk is the combination of the probability of occurrence of a harm and the severity of that harm. Risk management is the systematic approach to identify, assess, control, and monitor all risks associated with the medical device. A benefit is a positive impact or desirable outcome from the use of a medical device or a positive impact on patient management or public health. The risk management requirement can be tied back to Clause 7.1 of ISO 13485. However, this clause simply points to ISO 14971 for more information. ISO 13485 simply states that the organization shall document one or more processes for risk management. Risk management should be an ongoing part of the quality management system and is involved in just about every single process in some capacity, whether it's evaluating changes to documents or design, to applying risk-based approaches to items such as assessing suppliers, or whether it's handling complaints. Risks can be divided up into three major categories. The first is design risks. These are risks to the actual product that may impact function. Next, we have patient risks, and these are risks that may result in harms or inconveniences to patients or users. And lastly, there's QMS or business risks. These risks may jeopardize an organization's compliance to internal or external requirements and/or their ability to meet business goals or objectives. In this module, we'll mainly focus on design and patient risks. However, we will briefly touch on business risks at the end of the module. The following graphic represents the components of the risk management process. We start out with initiating the risk management process, then we go through risk assessment, where we identify, analyze, and evaluate risks. Then we get into risk control, where we try to reduce the risks, and then we decide whether the risk is acceptable or not. And then we have an output of the risk management process, which is usually like the risk management report. And then we have the risk review, where we review different events that may occur, and then see if there's any type of controls or what have you that we need to implement. We will dissect each of these in more detail shortly. First, we have risk assessment. Risk assessment consists of the identification of hazards and the analysis and evaluation of risks associated with exposure to those hazards. To help define risk, there are three fundamental questions that are often helpful. What might go wrong? What is the likelihood that it would go wrong? And what are the associated consequences? The first step in the risk assessment process is to identify risks. In other words, define what might go wrong. To help answer this question, an organization can pull from historical data, theoretical analysis, informed opinions, and/or the concerns of their stakeholders. Next, risks need to be analyzed. Analysis is done through the estimation of risks associated with identified hazards. Estimation occurs when we look at the occurrence and the severity of the harms, and this is typically done on a 5-point scale for both. The resulting combinations of the severity and harm are shown in the figure below. The estimation of severity and occurrence helps evaluate risks and identify risk acceptability. Risk evaluation compares the identified and analyzed risks against the given criteria. A preliminary hazard analysis, or PHA, is a tool that helps identify hazards, and these typically tie outcomes back to risk to the patient. So we start out with identifying what the hazard is or the potential source of the harm. Then we think about foreseeable events, or which events could lead to a hazard and/or hazardous situation. And then we have the hazardous situation where, it's the circumstance in which people, property, or the environment are exposed to the hazard. And then that may lead to the harm, or the physical injury or damage to the health of the people, property, environment, or the company. During the PHA development process, consider and focus on hazardous components, safety-related interfaces between various elements of the system, including the software, environmental restrictions, and including operating environments, testing, maintenance procedures, integrated tests, diagnostics and emergency facilities, installed equipment, um, support equipment and training, and just any possible malfunctions that may occur with the system or subsystem. A Failure Mode and Effects Analysis, or FMEA, is a tool that helps estimate and evaluate risks. These can be created for design, or DFMEA, use, or UFMEA, and process, or PFMEA. For PFMEAs, a threat multiplier detectability may also be used in addition to the severity and occurrence that we already discussed. For UFMEAs and DFMEAs, a threat multiplier preventability is sometimes used. Design FMEAs capture everything that can go wrong with a product based on its design. Design FMEA should mainly focus on impacts to the product's functionality with the goal of improvement of the finished goods in terms of reliability, safety, functioning, user interface, etc. Key inputs include material, ergonomics, electronics, packaging, labeling, etc. The DFMEA analyzes product design before release to production with the focus on product function in the early concept and design stages. DFMEAs can also help identify incoming inspection requirements. An example of a risk in a DFMEA may be a component of the device missing or being out of tolerance that may lead to a complete loss of product function or reduced product performance. Use FMEAs capture all things that can go wrong as the user operates the device and should include even how a user may misuse the device. UFMEA should align directly with what is in the user manual and/or surgical technique. Key inputs to use FMEAs include all steps required to set up, assemble, operate, store, clean, etc. to the device. UFMEAs can help identify contents that are lacking in the instructions for use or labeling, and UFMEAs can be conducted in parallel with the PHA to help identify all possible use errors and try to eliminate them using design control. An example of a risk in a UFMEA may be a surgeon incorrectly holding a sharp instrument or not following the user manual of that instrument that leads to them being accidentally cut by the product. Process FMEA should capture everything that can go wrong as a product is being manufactured, starting with the collection of raw materials all the way through the product being shipped. PFMEAs help identify process variables on which to focus controls for occurrence reduction or elimination and detection. The process may need to be redesigned in order to minimize risks of some failure modes. An example of a risk that may be in a PFMEA may be a lathe or some machinery being incorrectly set up or incorrectly cutting a product that may lead to the product being scrapped. And so just to recap the whole FMEA process, we start off with an input. That input could then experience some type of failure mode. Then we want to look at the effect of that failure mode and the cause of that failure mode. And then we want to look at how we can control that failure mode and any actions that we can implement to reduce the likelihood of that failure mode. The product of the multipliers that we mentioned, the severity, occurrence, the detectability sometimes, and preventability, is the risk priority number, or RPN. When failure modes have been ranked by RPN, corrective actions should first be directed at the highest ranked concerns in any items that we have deemed critical. The goal should be to reduce the probability of occurrence, increase the probability of detection, and design revisions may be required. Increasing quality control inspection frequency should only be used as a temporary measure, and the emphasis should more so be placed on preventing the defects rather than detecting them. After corrective actions have been implemented and recorded, then we would recalculate the RPN to see if there's any revised scores or reductions that we may see. Next, we have risk controls. Risk control includes decision-making to reduce and/or accept risks. The purpose of risk control is to reduce risk to an acceptable level. The amount of effort used in risk control should be proportionate to the significance of that risk. And with risk control, you might focus on the following questions, and that is the risk above an acceptable level? What can be done to reduce or eliminate the risks? What is the appropriate balance among the benefits, risks, and resources? And or are there any new risks introduced as a result of identified risks being controlled? Risk reduction focuses on mitigation or avoidance of risk and includes actions taken to mitigate the severity and probability of harm. Processes that improve detectability of hazards may also be used as a part of a risk control strategy. Additionally, a design or process may be poka-yoked. Poka-yoke means mistake-proof. It is a Japanese word, and it is the use of any automatic device or method that either makes it impossible for an error to occur or makes the error immediately obvious once it has occurred. And so, in other words, it's a potential risk being designed out to prevent it from ever happening, or if it does happen, it happens in a foolproof way. The implementation of risk reduction measures can introduce new risks into the system or increase the significance of other risks. And so it might be appropriate to revisit the risk assessment to identify and evaluate any possible changes in risks after risk reduction has occurred. Risk acceptance is the decision point to accept the risk. The different RPN sums correspond to different risk levels, such as low, medium, or moderate, sometimes called moderate and high. The low risk level is, typically accepted, while the moderate and high levels typically are only accepted with further justifications of why it's okay to accept them. Residual risks are defined as the risks that remain after risk control measures have been implemented. Next, we have risk review. So organizations should have a mechanism or a process to review and monitor events, and that process should be implemented. The outputs or results of the risk management process should be reviewed to take into account new knowledge and experience. And this is kind of similar to the post-market process, which we'll get into in a few. Once a quality risk management process has been initiated, that process should continue to be utilized for events that might impact the original quality risk management decision, whether these events are planned, for example, results of product reviews, inspections, audits, change control, or unplanned, such as root cause analysis, recalls, etc. The frequency of any review should be based upon the level of risk, and the risk review might include reconsideration of risk acceptance decisions. Next, we have risk-benefit analysis. A risk-benefit analysis is a comparison between the risks of a situation and its benefits. The goal is to figure out whether the risk or the benefit is most significant. To complete a risk-benefit analysis, there are four main pieces of information you may need, and that's, what are the risks? How likely are the risks to happen? What are the benefits? And how likely are the benefits to happen? As mentioned earlier, residual risk is the risk remaining after risk controls have been applied. The product should not be placed on the market if the benefit does not outweigh the risks, and there should be a documented risk-benefit analysis. Evidence should support that benefits outweigh potential risks. If the evidence does not support that conclusion, then the manufacturer may consider modifying the device or its intended use. Evidence can come from data or clinical literature. And if there's not any evidence, if there's nothing to justify that the benefits outweigh the risks, then that risk would be unacceptable. The results of the risk-benefit analysis should be documented in the risk management file. Next, we have risk communication. And so risk communication is sharing the information about a risk or risk management between decision makers and others, whether it be users or regulators or what have you. Parties can communicate at any stage about the risk management process, and the output or result of the risk management process should be appropriately documented. So let's now review some of the key documentation that's needed for risk management. So all risk documents should be included in the device's risk management file, or RMF, and there should be a risk management plan, or RMP. This should be created during the developmental process and should be updated as needed. We also have a risk management report, or RMR, and that is needed to conclude the findings of risk management data. And then moving into the post-market phase, the RMR should be reviewed and updated throughout the product's life cycle. Documents such as the PFMEA and the different FMEAs are most commonly used for risk identification, estimation, and evaluation, and should also be included in the RMF. And then for product going into the EU, risk documentation such as the post-market surveillance plan, and the periodic safety update report, or PSUR, or post-market surveillance report, or PMSR, should also be included. The post-market surveillance plan is also required per the FDA, and then the PSUR versus PMSR kind of depends on the device classification, but we will also discuss that information more in Module 8. All right, so now let's touch on classification. And so the FDA categorizes medical devices into one of three classes, class 1, 2, or 3, and that's based on their risks and their regulatory controls necessary to provide a reasonable assurance of the safety and effectiveness of that device. Class 1 devices generally pose the lowest risk to the patient and or user, and Class 3 devices pose the highest risk. And so for Class 1 devices, those are typically like general reusable instruments. Class 2 devices may be a single-use sterile instrument, and Class 3 devices are more like implant devices. For the EU, there are 4 different classes of devices, and you start with Class 1 or low-risk devices. Again, also like the general reusable instruments, then we have Class 2A devices, and that's kind of a medium risk. That may also be certain instruments or single-use instruments, or software might even be 2A. Then we have Class 2B, and implants can fall into Class 2B. And then we have the Class 3, which might be biologic material, for example. Now let's briefly touch on post-market. So as new users interact with the device, new risks will be identified. These risks can be captured as complaints or feedback. During a complaint investigation, the risk management file should be reviewed to see if these new risks should be added. Probability ratings should also be evaluated based on device performance and complaint rates. And the risk management process ultimately never ends for medical device companies. All throughout post-market, all throughout the device's life cycle, risk management will be in play. But more information on post-market complaints and feedback will be captured in Module 8. Let's now briefly touch on QMS and business risks. So any place where an organization does not adequately meet an applicable requirement, whether that's an internal or external requirement, can become a risk that may impact a company's revenue and or reputation. When an organization has projects, they often have project managers that are put into place to oversee projects to closure. And these projects can be from the development of new product, remediation of documents to an updated regulation, etc. And so the organization or that project manager may use a risk burn down chart as a tool to help mitigate risks. A risk burn down chart is a tool that project managers can use to show graphically how risk could affect the project completion, and it is designed to show risks that could be detrimental to that project, as well as risks that could improve the project's completion. And so after completing all the training modules, you'll get a better idea of the many ways organizations may experience risks, as you will then know and be more familiar with all of the various requirements that are going to be listed throughout all the modules. So you'll learn more as we go through. And that brings us to the end of Module 3. Be sure to review all applicable form procedures and templates that Brooke has related to the requirements in this module. And when preparing documents using these templates, again, be sure to customize them to what the organization is actually doing. Before moving to the next module, make sure that you take the Module 3 quiz. You will need to score at least an 80% to pass this quiz, and the quiz can be retaken as many times as needed.